It's Friday, and that means it's another edition of the Zogby Report, real and unscripted. And believe me, this is real, and it is totally unscripted because we haven't really talked or agreed at all on topics. So I'm pulling this one out of my hat today, and it's that ugly demon monster that raises its head every 4 years. It's called the Electoral College, or as we used to say, everybody used to say in seventh grade, the Electoral College. But this is something, of course, that's been around. It's in the Constitution, actually, and I want to do a little bit of background on it. But how are you doing, Jared? That sound good to you?
Oh, yeah, we can talk about that.
Okay, so it's not as ugly and not as undemocratic as one would think. Sure, the founding fathers were elitists. Sure, they were merchants. Let's call them the bourgeoisie of the day. They're the people with a small p were not present during any of their deliberations. But the bottom line is that when it came to creating a new government, and it's most especially the creation of a chief executive who was not a king, they wanted to ensure that they got stability, but at the same time, legitimacy. And so for many of them, including the most liberals like Jefferson and Madison, there was a sense of democracy meaning mob-ocracy, that we shouldn't be giving too much away in terms of the right to vote and the right to choose our government leaders. And so the Electoral College was created as a buffer, as a means of ensuring that while the people voted, let's call them the bourgeoisie again, but the leaders got their final check just to make sure that there wasn't anything dangerous, no demagoguery and that sort of thing. And so the way that things worked, they did that, and they also protected some of the smaller states, to ensure that they had their say in the election of the president. Otherwise, Rhode Island, very tiny state, would have been lost in a national vote. And so the way it works is that each state would have electors, and these are people who would meet in the state capitol 1 month to the day after the people voted, and the electors, would cast the actual ballot for president, and whichever candidate won the majority of electors, that candidate won that state. And you needed X number, a majority of electors throughout the states in order to be elected president. If there was no majority, the election went to the House of Representatives, and that's a whole other story for another time. That's actually happened a few times. But the notion of the Electoral College and its, quote, unfairness and undemocratic elements has been a theme throughout our history, and in particular at times when there's been controversy. We've had a lot of it in the last 20 some odd years, that a candidate can actually win the popular vote but lose the Electoral College. And so very simply, the Electoral College is based on population, number one, which means bigger states have more electors in their Electoral College. What's the formula? You add the number of members of the House of Representatives from that state plus the number of senators, which is always 2. And so, California has 53 representatives, 2 senators. Texas is up there. New York is up there. Meanwhile, Delaware and Vermont, and Hawaii, Alaska, they have 3 electoral votes, the 2 senators, and then just simply the 1 a representative. How do you get to be an elector? Well, prominence used to be a key factor, But basically, as we evolved into a political party system, it was based on party loyalty. And so the Democratic Party in each state would field a group of loyal Democrats, and the Republicans the same. And if they're third party candidates or minor candidates, they would be expected to have a team of electors as well, corresponding to the number of members of the House and members of the Senate in the state. And when votes were cast, whichever candidate won the popular vote in that state, not a majority, but the popular vote in that state, then his electors were elected to go to the state capitol and cast their vote. In 99 plus instances, it's expected that because these folks were chosen for party loyalty, they would go to the state capitol as Democrats or Republicans and cast their vote for the party's nominee. Here and there, there'd be a rogue elector or someone who said, I in good conscience can't vote for my party's person, and so I'll cast my own rogue vote the way I want. But of course, there's a lot of talk about it with this new populism these days, and the fact that it's very important that members of the Electoral College be loyal to their party. Otherwise, it could be devastating. Is that undemocratic or not? Do we need a final check on mobocracy? I mean, could it be without an Electoral College that David Duke, the head of the Ku Klux Klan, very good on television, very good in social media, popular white supremacist notions, could actually win a state or two, just maybe in a 5-candidate race, get 28% of the vote, win that state, and hence win the electoral votes in that state. Do we still need that, or do we not need that? That's one question, and then the other question is, what does an electoral map look like? That's what folks like us do for a living, not just public opinion, but and not just who wins the popular vote, but let's look at each state, because there are 538 electors, and whoever wins the presidency has to get a majority, 270 electoral votes. And there's a scenario that I heard just the other day that I will share with you. It's by my colleague Charlie Cook, the great numbers counter and congressional watcher. And he said that, aside from the states that are clearly red and clearly blue, you add all those up in each column, Biden, Trump. But then take a look at the Southwest: Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, the Sun Belt to North Carolina. His words: there is no way that Joe Biden wins those states. So he put those into Trump's column and said, then let's look at the North, the battleground states. And there you have Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. If Biden wins those, Biden gets presumably 271 electoral votes to Trump's 269 electoral votes. Now, fly in the ointment. You got 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, that don't award all the electors to whoever wins. The congressional districts are independent. If Trump were to win 1 vote in Maine or one vote electoral in Nebraska, it would be 270 to 270. And that's what we call a mess. It would go to the House of Representatives. What do you think? I mean, is this pretty arcane? Should we even need to be talking about an electoral college anymore? Any effort to try to get rid of it always fails after every election. It's not even taken seriously. What do you think?
Well, that's a lot. But in my lifetime, after a contentious election, there'd be an op-ed, obviously. But I think the one time that it appeared that there was some seriousness to even discussing this was 2016. I know that when we would travel to Washington, D.C., and that should be no surprise that following Trump's victory and assuming the office, I heard that everywhere. I mean, I heard that from native-born Americans, and I heard that from foreign nationals. A lot of people were of the opinion to scrap the Electoral College, but what do you replace it with? What's our option? We have really two options. You could either just have a flat-out direct democracy, like Switzerland, one man, one woman, one vote, or we could get techie sophisticated and go down the path of ranked choice voting. I don't know. I know that this is the system that's been in place. I know that there was a logic to it, that it fit neatly into the vast body of checks and balances that were established when this nation was founded. Remember the context when they came up with the Electoral College, and it was supposed to protect the system. It was supposed to create stability within a system among a generation of people who, for decades, faced a lot of instability. The Revolutionary War and the perilous times that followed independence. But remember, when the Electoral College was established with the Constitution, this is just a little tidbit to think about. It's context. The understanding was the national government was supposed to be a limited government. So now, the national government has long departed from that notion, and it is overreaching. In fact, we are on a trajectory that the federal government, the national government, is posturing itself to really have a say in almost every aspect of our lives. So then, what do? Right? When we see it in that light, how do we view the Electoral College? Do we see it as a necessary check? I don't know. That's just a question that comes to my mind. But I think the larger point behind what I'm saying when I opened was, in my life, the only time that I heard the discussion become popular and kind of go into overdrive was when Hillary Clinton voters in 2016 were devastated, and that she won the popular vote but lost the Electoral College, and I mean that's just sore loserdom. So it seems to be that it becomes fashionable to talk about it when your guy or your lady doesn't win, and that's not really good for our tradition. But just one last thing I'll say is it undemocratic? Well, remember, we are supposed to be a republic. A republic is a form of democracy, but it is not intended to be direct democracy. The balance is that the citizens had a lot of power vested in themselves, in their person, in their lives, in their choices to go about their lives, and then there were some powers to the national government, and there were a lot of powers to the state. But when we talk about it being undemocratic, then I guess what we need to realize is that perhaps this nation, in terms of the institutions, let's not get into slavery and gender relations, but then you'd have to say, well, the institution from the start was undemocratic, but it was never intended to be a pure democracy like Athens was, for example.
No, it never was, but we've reached a tipping point here and now. What you say about 2016 is correct. What was said back in 2000, equally correct. When for all intents and purposes, you really had a tie, and that even with George W. Bush's victory in the state of Florida, he only won by two electoral votes. But the concern here is, I honestly believe in 2024, we are at the point where neither side is willing to accept the results of the election, popular vote, or especially Electoral College. And that if we're in a situation again, and we could very well be, where, say, Joe Biden wins the popular vote, but loses several of those battleground states, even by a hair, that that you have Democrats this time who are not willing to accept another Trump presidency. We have plenty of evidence, not only since 2020, but in demeanor and among supporters today, that that's probably going to be the case with MAGA Republicans, that they just won't accept a Biden victory. And so what we have is the anatomy of a mess. My view, I think the Electoral College is necessary. I think it is that one final check against mob-ocracy. It may not work. It may not work well, and that final check may not be what we hope for, what people are hoping for. But what?
Oh no, I'll just say, because I'm afraid we're running out of time. But I'll just say that I think we're already at the point of mobocracy. So I don't know that and that's not because of the Electoral College. One could make that argument, but I don't think that that's really the case. I think it's hyperpolarization and hyperpartisanship. I think driven by a media frenzy and a lack of real discussion on media, national media, and a tendency to in the narrative, the popular narrative, to have this overarching backdrop of division and divisiveness, and unfortunately voters step in line and follow. So I think we've already reached the point of mobocracy. 2016 and 2020 prove that. And yes, I agree with you. To me, it's baked into the equation that 2024 would be no different, will be no different. If it's a Trump victory, Biden voters will reject it. If it's a Biden victory, Trump voters will reject it. But there is, and we keep talking about this because we're doing the polling, but there could be a scenario where if Kennedy gets on the ballot in 50 states and wins a Nebraska or a Maine or even both, which is conceivable, that it would throw it to the House. And where everything goes from there, I don't know, but we're reaching a high point. That's for sure.
And the rules in the House are not what people think they are. But let's not get into it now. Let's save it for the future.
That's a good topic for another time.
It really is, because that is the anatomy of a mess right there. And that involves horse trading. And horse trading is messy. So, good. So, do we need an electoral college? I'll end by saying yes.
I will say I'm undecided. No, I lean towards yes, because we've had it, and it's I don't think it's broken. I don't think it's the dynamic that led us to this point. So because of that, I will agree.
Okay, those of you who are watching and listening, sleep well. And we'll be back next week with another show about something controversial, I'm sure. Bye-bye.
Take care.